So thank you for being here. I think we'll get started now. So glad to see everybody here. I'm Marjorie Nathanson, the Executive Director of Hunterdon Art Museum. And thank you for joining us in this webinar with Thea Clark in conjunction with her show Do Undo, which is up through March 5th. I'd like to thank our major funders, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a partner of the National Endowment for the Arts and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, as well as other corporations, foundations, and individuals. We're delighted to have an exhibition of Thea's work at the museum and grateful that she's here with us tonight to talk about her show, which spans the last 10 years. If you have any questions during her presentation, please just type them into the chat function and we'll take a look at them at the end of her presentation and answer them. Thea Clark is a former resident of New Jersey. She now lives in North Carolina. Her jewelry and installations have been shown in many New Jersey museums and also at the Museum of Art and Design in New York City, the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C., the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston, and in numerous other places across the country. In addition, her work has been included in exhibitions in Europe, including in Munich, Vienna, London, Amsterdam, to name just a few cities. But I know we're all interested in hearing from Thea, so I'm going to turn this over to her now. So Thea, take it away.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all for coming. So without further ado, I'm going to launch right in here. So just a little bit of background. I came to jewelry and visual art in general in making when I was in my mid-20s, maybe a little bit later than some. I had spent time as a dancer and later after that as a professional stage actress. And I think that these earlier experiences really account for being drawn to jewelry in the first place, which uses the human body as a portable canvas, and where there's consideration of movement, which is really critical in the creative process. I consider myself a filter for experiences of living in this specific time that we're in of intense climate change, and also of my curiosities and concerns around that and questions. So I meld conceptual ideas with material explorations. When I work intuitively with found objects or materials I'm drawn to, I'm looking for clues within that process as to what idea is trying to come forth, or looking for ways to use that particular material to expand on ideas that I'm starting out with. I do tend towards making abstract work, but the references to the ideas are really embedded there in those histories or references of the materials themselves. So, and although many of my pieces are complicated structures, I do strive for a simplicity in the overall finished work. So over the last decade, the period of time that's featured in the exhibit at Hunterdon Art Museum, Do Undo, I've examined states of being around the quickening man-made crisis of climate change in my practice. So that includes the sense of a destabilized moment to the foreboding or anxiety when we look forward. And I'm drawn to materials that really bear some kind of imprint of human contact that bring the man-made. And
there we go. We have you back. Gotta love technology, right?
I'm so sorry, everyone. I really apologize for that. So I think what I was saying was that I'm really drawn to materials that have this, come from the man, that are either man-made or that have the touch of humans somehow connected to it, that really bring the human scale world into focus. And so you can see this in my use of clothing or domestic textiles. And those are actually sometimes used in my work as stand-ins for human presence. And construction materials as well, which can reference both destruction or reconstruction of the built environment. If you can put slide 2 on, please. Thank you. So this is a pendant called Warned. It's from 2012, and it's the first use in my jewelry of construction materials. It has an element of acoustic tile, which has been colored with a little bit of iron oxide, and pieces of asphalt shingles. The bright yellow framing conveys the sense of warning and danger. This piece was really the beginning of my processing of having experienced hurricanes Irene and Sandy when I was living in New Jersey. And like, you know, many people, I lost power for a week, had limited fuel, felt the support of community, but also felt people's panics over, you know, over those fuel shortages and overall just a sense of the fragility of our social structure that seemed to kind of hit home for the first time for me during those incidents. The top element here is actually a photograph that I took of trees and then developed using the cyanotype process on silk. And that's a technique that I used that was very prominent feature in a previous jewelry series that predates my climate work. I often find that, you know, that the beginnings of new series of work are discovered in the tail end of the previous series. Sometimes there can be some overlap. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is a piece from that previous series. This piece is called Cyan House. And again, there is a photograph there of a house. After the hurricanes, I was looking at weather systems online and encountered Isobar maps for the first time. So I was really drawn to the graphic element that is an Isobar map and the visualizations in them of high and low pressure movement. And I was taken by how similar to the cross section of trees, the rings of a tree, those storm systems can appear on the Isobar maps. So this piece, it's from a tail end of that earlier series that focused on identity. And here you see that cyanotype of the house. But on the back of this piece, that was actually the first use of an Isobar map. So can't see it in this picture, but I do consider this a transition piece because what I was thinking about and was starting to shift, and that was evident in the piece. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is a picture of an Isobar map, which maybe can give you some idea of if you haven't seen one before. So the jewelry pieces in Do, Undo are bookends. So they include the very first climate-focused jewelry works I made, and as well as the most recent ones. However, other series of jewelry or installations and sculptures I've made during that 10-year period have also focused on climate change. And other elements of those other works have definitely informed my jewelry. If we can, so for some examples, I wanted to give you an idea. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is an image from an installation called The Quick and the Deep from 2014 at the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey in Summit. And this included the first use of domestic fabrics, also included video and a larger scale use of construction materials. There were still isobars in cyanotype form and otherwise, as well as cyanotypes of tree bark. These were images that were carrying over into this other work. This part was in the hallway outside the gallery. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here's a partial image of the installation from the inside of the gallery. So I think you can really see in this image the theme of the conflict of nature and the built environment, represented by the use of the textiles, the damaged piece of furniture precariously resting on that large form, and the building with these building materials and embedded in that, and the juxtaposed to that tree stump on the floor itself. So as I was saying, the boundaries between these different types of art outputs were definitely breaking down for me as the materials and the ideas from whether it was installation or sculpture really started to cross back and forth. And I think in one part, it's really because I am, as a jewelry maker, I am not considered with I'm not really concerned, I should say, with the traditional use of stones and metals to create jewelry that, has some kind of objective monetary value. I'm really interested and consider myself a part of a small contingent of art jewelry makers who approach the work of really more as sculpture, or perhaps even body-informed sculpture is another way to describe it. We can go to the next slide, please. This piece is from the show Do Undo is called Red Weather 1. And this piece, well, actually all of the early red pieces that are included in Do Undo of this one, this is the first one I used the Isobar map on the front of the work. The home here is captured in a photograph, and you can see that this sort of three-dimensional representation of damage, perhaps like a visualization of the moment of impact of some damage to the home. The color red is very indicative of color of alarm, and the three-dimensional shapes in this almost remind me of, in a graphic way, of the comic book sort of violence with exploding indicators, like when they use words pow and bang. It has a kind of element of that kind of graphic energy. You can go to the next slide, please. This piece is called Red Weather 2, also a necklace. It incorporates a photograph I took of an enormous old white oak tree in front of my house. Now here you see more of the three-dimensional red wire shapes. That the red in these pieces is a tinted plastic that I was using. And you can see it has kind of a drawn comic book-like quality as well, capturing that essence of the energy and the danger emanating from its trunk. And also at the bottom, you might notice the use of the black knotted cord. It's kind of contributing a little bit more information there than just a decorative element. If you could go to the next slide, please. This piece is a brooch called Cloud, and it's related to the red weather necklaces by color and subject. But in this case, you can see that the form is influenced, I think, by the grids of the graphics of the Isobar maps. And the knotting here is more central to the piece as well, as indicated in the title, Cloud. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. This is also a brooch. It's named I. And this piece, I think, captures the sense of motion of the high and low pressures from the Isobar maps, while the central circle invokes the calm at the eye of a storm. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is a necklace called Skies. I think that you can also see that the framing structure of this piece in the light blue is also informed by the grid form itself. The internal shapes and colors, they capture a range really of the sky's hues with weather change and precipitation. This is a piece taken from in 2016 from a solo exhibit that I had in San Francisco at a gallery called the Velvet Da Vinci Gallery. It was a site-specific installation with jewelry and sculpture. And it was set in a freight elevator that had a two-story elevator shaft with a skylight up above. So this particular show was based on my research into the geological expeditions of Greenland by a woman named Louise Arner Boyd during the 1930s. So she had published a volume of scientific findings, which she basically, she was the one who organized the expedition and hired the scientists. And so then she created a publication that included their findings. And those findings included really highly detailed maps of glaciers, a tremendous amount of black and white photographs that she took, also data from echo sounding research that was conducted in the fjords. So I scanned a large and enlarged and digitally enhanced the publication, the book itself, and from a chapter called Narrative. And that's actually the start of the work that you see on the left-hand side. And if we can go to the next slide, you'll see that a little better. Yes, so here's the scan. And the piece on this, which I think you can go to the next slide as well. Thank you. This piece was the first time I incorporated actual anthracite coal into my work, which is what that black element is on the lower left side there. It's something I'm still using, and you do see in Do Undo. So I wanted to point that out. If you can go to the next slide, please. And here you are looking up the elevator shaft, 2 stories, looking at these hanging cylindrical forms I created to the skylight. There were binoculars hanging there in the elevator so you could look up into the forms, and it was a way to activate the installation and sort of recreate the experience of exploration of for that show. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this piece is also from that installation called, this piece was entitled The Head of Franz Joseph Fjord Brooch. It's one of the few pieces from the show that you can see the continued use of the knotted cord to really create form. And in this case, it mirrored the textures that were seen in some of the very detailed photographs that were taken by Louise Arner-Board on the surface of the glaciers. Here, there's also some rutilated quartz beads and some oxidized silver circles that mimic debris that's seen frozen into ice. So I just wanted to point out, though, that by this point in 2016, I had moved away from the use of tinted liquid plastic, which we saw in the earlier red elements in the pieces you see in Do Undo. But this particular piece did make use of this material for the last time when I included that black element, which was actually a separate element that was a holdover from 2020. It just finally got incorporated into this piece several years later. So if you can go to the next slide, thank you. In 2019, I created several pieces that began my use of shells as a way to purposely invoke nature and the ocean, specifically in my work. This piece is a brooch you can see in Do Undo. It is called Memonero. So in addition to the found shells in this brooch, you'll also see that there is an element of coal there on the right. And just below the coal piece is a yellow form that is actually pine rosin, which is made from the sap of pine trees. So I wanted to use these elements to reflect how they're connected to the cycle of conflict that's led to our current climate crisis, whether that's deforestation or the use of fossil fuels, leading to warming water and ocean level rise. And by that conflict, I'm really referring to that disequilibrium of our relationship to the earth and its resources. So when you hold this brooch and you look closely into the yellow rosin, you can make out the word remember, which is behind the yellow. So you can sort of look through it. It's like sort of like looking through water or very wavy glass. In Latin, Memonero, it means to remember, or I hold in memory. This piece, you also can see the knotting here. And in the most recent pieces, Do Undo, the knotting is really creating structure, it's true, but there's also a metaphor that's wrapped in what is really a very laborious, repetitive making of knotting this small cord over and over to build these forms. It's these small, repetitive actions that accumulate, just as so many actions that we've taken as a society, right, to reach this environmental precipice where we are right now. So, I also think, though, that they represent many new actions that we can take. right, to try to undo what we've done. So, you know, I mean, at times the actions that we can take seem inconsequential because they're so small, but this metaphor can be read as something hopeful, I hope, right, pertaining to the value of these small repeated efforts, which cumulatively can contribute to change. You can go to the next slide, please. Also in the show, Do Undo, is this large conch shell necklace from 2019. Can also be seen as a ceremonial necklace for a climate warrior. The textile in the upper section is from fabric, was chosen because it's fabric with a graphic design on it. It's from the 60s. You know, when I look at that fabric, I see, you know, that time period in the design, and which was why I chose it. I chose it for its age and also for its sunny, carefree quality. The intensely knotted form, dotted with pearls below it, is sort of similar to a hyperboloid structure of a cooling tower. The title of this piece is Ad Oceanum et Terram, which is Latin meaning of ocean and earth. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a pendant. Again, you're seeing some of these similar materials in use here. Amplified was made in 2021 for the show Do Undo, and it continues with these materials. You can see the anthracite coal on the bottom, the found shell, and a cloud-like structure of knotted cord with pearls up above. What you can't see, though, is on the reverse side of this is a cyanotype of an Isobar map. And the Isobar maps, when you're looking at those maps, the closeness of the lines indicate the lower pressure, as does the shape of the lines. The more curves, the more the lower the pressure is. And together, that indicates that a storm would be amplified. And this title, thus the title of this piece, which is Amplify. So you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a brooch entitled Plain to Sea Brooch. I guess it shows my continuing love of maps. In this instance, on the lower portion, what you see are silver circles that have been set with small pieces of maps of flooding from Hurricane Florence in North Carolina. The way they're set, there's a little attachment point that I was able to sew these on individually so that there's a lot of movement in this piece when it's worn. So what you can't see on this piece is the title from a book. It says Ecology on the back. So that's just another, a lot of the times when you're making jewelry, one of the things that is special about making jewelry is that there are parts that are for the person looking at the jewelry, but then there are some things that are just for the person interacting with it and perhaps wearing it. So you'll oftentimes see these little hidden things on the reverse sides. You can go to the next slide, please. This necklace is called Unseasonable, Summer and Winter. It was also made for Do Undo, also made in 2021. So it's a necklace that repurposes clothing, which you can see in that central element, and as well as a repurposed earmuff, which is the blue fluffy stuff in the back. That's the main element, and that's circled by beads that came from a repurposed vintage coral necklace. So the lightweight cotton is usually associated with warm weather, and that stands in contrast to the warmth. And colder weather, we would turn to the lamb's wool muff, and it's really a reference to the crazy weather patterns that are more common now with climate change. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the last piece I made for Do Undo was an installation piece entitled Necklace for a Tree. The floor piece in the gallery, though, it became an opportunity to make a performative video, and which is what this is the first, this is a still from the first moment of that video. And so it's a documentation of a sort of a ritual-like performative process. And I refer to the video itself here as the crone bequeaths her riches to the world. If you can go to the next slide, please. I did want to mention, because I wanted to just let you know, if you haven't been to see the show, I am, spoiler alert, I'm giving away the end of the video. The process of laying down this central element that you see on the floor here, which is the installation necklace for a tree. As I'm unraveling that, the fabric has been wound on an object. And at the end of the video, you see that the object is in fact an old volume of a book called The Fundamentals of Ecology, which is a seminal book about ecology. And so this piece, Necklace for a Tree, it does harken back to earlier sculptures and installations. I used a single cotton bedsheet that was cut and sewn, randomly knotted, and then finally colored with slip that I made from clay soil. And for me, this piece and the process of installing the piece really creates a liminal space within a gallery. And so if you could go to the next slide, please. So liminals comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. And to me, I really feel that, I'm capturing the essence of these times, right, with unimaginable change. And this Venn diagram here really speaks to this time period that we're in, to the uncertainty of the unknown. And, we know we're no longer where we were. We know we're not yet where we're going to be. And it's this liminal space that I tried to capture with the work in Do and Do. So that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thea, thank you. Thank you so much. It's fascinating. I am not seeing any questions in chat. So if anybody has a question, please put it in. But there's something I've been wondering about. Mm-hmm. For centuries and centuries, jewelry is thought of as adornment. Your work goes so far beyond that. So I'm wondering about precedents for that. When I think about it, I think about religious symbols that are used as jewelry, but beyond that, are there precedents for thinking of jewelry as something beyond adornment?
Boy, that's a question for like a whole college course. And the answer is absolutely yes. There is a strong history of art jewelry in the United States. You can really look to the post-World War II period and the GI Bill, when a lot of people went back to school and became jewelers, went to metalsmithing courses, and really sort of the essence of what became American jewelry, art jewelry, contemporary jewelry started. So there are many, it's a flourishing field in many respects. And I would say, that the American art jewelry does have a tendency to be a little more narrative in nature than the European art jewelry, which is maybe a little bit more purely abstract. So yes, the question is, what is adornment, right? What do you want to wear and why do you want to wear it? So I think art jewelry it's not something, it's not a wedding ring. It's not your name on a chain, but you are, people who do wear art jewelry into the world do embrace the ability that it's giving them to communicate And I think that that excites them, that they feel that there's like an interaction between the work and themselves when they bring that work, you know, out of their home into the world. So, so there is, you know, it is not as common as Tiffany's, that's for sure, but it's definitely not meant to, it's not the same thing. It's really more of jewelry via, you know, art in terms of trying to communicate something else. The fact that it's on the body means that, you know, there may be limitations, or there may be expectations that you want to play with, to comment on the way jewelry is typically seen. So in the world of art jewelry, you might see a necklace that's, you know, this wide. How do you get through the door? That's commenting on, you know, what's expected of jewelry. So it is a deep and rich field. There is a publication that is put out by the Society of North American Goldsmiths. It's primarily, that's like an academic organization, but not only, there are lots of independent jewelers and art jewelers who are part of that organization. And they have a magazine called Metalsmith. And actually it was when I came across that magazine many years ago, before I had ever even taken my first jewelry class. I opened this magazine and just saw, you know, the strangest piece of jewelry I'd ever seen. And, you know, it just, you know, fireworks started to explode. And I really understood at that moment, just seeing that image, that, okay, you know, that looks really fascinating, and I can make something that's on a smaller scale that can, which for some reason, you know, there's something that is very appealing to those of us who practice in, you know, in art jewelry. There's something about the scale, the humanness of the scale, and that knowing that there's going to be a human interaction with the work. That's definitely part of the appeal. So I'm not sure if I answered your question about precedent, but there is. I don't think it's very well known. You know, there are certainly websites out there, and there are many practitioners. I guess there are two websites I could recommend if people were interested in kind of getting a sense of the scope of other practitioners. One is called Klimt, as in the artist, Klimt02.net. That's an international website of art jewelers. And then the other one is Art Jewelry Forum, which is a US-based website, but they are striving to be international in scope. I think they are fairly international in scope. And so those two websites are the most prominent online right now, if people wanted to get a sense of what other amazing sculptures and thought ideas are being batted around in that realm.
Thank you. I can't wait to look at those websites. Thanks. Before we close, do you want to tell us what you're working on now, or what you'll be working on in the future?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. So I think at this particular junction, I am moving toward working more with fiber on a 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional way, on a larger scale, as installation, as well as on a smaller scale. I still believe I am going to be using maps. That seems to be, you know, these graphic data seems to be something that's starting to become more prominent, or that continues to be a touchstone for me. So I think the next works I'm going to be making will be on a larger scale, because I have a residency planned here in Greensboro in an artist space in a community center here that'll give me the wall space to work on a larger scale. So I'm going to take advantage of that. And so I think you're going to see cousins of Necklace for a Tree next.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you everyone who tuned in to watch. Just a reminder that we have a couple of other webinars coming up this spring. We'll be talking to Malcolm Mobutu Smith on Saturday, March 26th, and Annette Carter on April 2nd. So hope you'll tune in for that. Hope you come to the museum and see Thea's beautiful work in person. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marjorie. Bye-bye.